He took his new girlfriend to the hospital for a checkup, but froze when his pregnant ex-wife was rushed in to give birth. James Carter strode through the gleaming lobby of the private hospital in Seattle, his confident steps echoing on the polished marble floor. The woody scent of his cologne mingled with the sterile tang of antiseptic that hung in the air. Beside him, Mia, her long auburn hair cascading in perfect waves, clutched her phone, snapping a selfie while complaining, with a hint of drama, about a nagging stomachache that had bothered her for days. "You think it's serious, James?" she asked, her eyes glinting with a mix of worry and vanity. James barely registered her words. His fingers danced across his phone, firing off replies to clients about a new luxury real estate venture. "It's just a routine checkup, babe." "You'll be fine," he said, eyes glued to the screen. James's world was a whirlwind of deals, charm, and a touch of arrogance, a life he'd crafted with precision. But fate, like a ruthless conductor, was about to change the tune. They settled into the waiting room, a sleek space with taupe walls and leather armchairs that screamed sophistication. James felt the comfortable weight of a life that seemed perfect. Mia, at 25, was everything he thought he deserved after his divorce. Young, vibrant, a spark that made him feel alive again. His ex-wife, Rachel, was the opposite, also he told himself now. During their 7 years of marriage, Rachel had been his anchor, hosting flawless dinner parties for clients, laughing at his jokes even when they fell flat, and standing by him when deals went south. But over time, James began to see her as a burden, someone who, as he told friends over expensive whiskey, got too comfortable. She stopped living, you know, became ordinary, he'd say with a dismissive smirk, brushing off the memory like lint on his tailored suit. What James didn't know, and never suspected, was that Rachel carried a secret. 8 months ago, just before they signed the divorce papers, she discovered she was pregnant. The news hit her like a bolt from a clear sky, but Rachel, with her quiet strength, chose not to tell him. James had already checked out emotionally, his gaze fixed on a new life. Telling him about the baby would have been like begging for scraps of affection, and Rachel wasn't one to beg. She swallowed her pain, signed the papers, and moved forward alone, one hand on her growing belly, her heart broken but strong enough to love the child she was carrying. In the waiting room, the air conditioner hummed softly, and Mia flipped through a fashion magazine, commenting on a celebrity's dress. "Would this look good on me, James?" He gave a half smile, more reflex than interest, when a sudden commotion in the hallway caught his attention. Nurses rushed by, a gurney sped past, and urgent voices cut through the air. "Labor! Room 5, stat!" James glanced up, curious but unbothered, until he saw her. Rachel. Time froze. His phone slipped from his hands, landing in his lap with a dull thud. There she was, on the gurney, her face pale and slick with sweat, her dark hair plastered to her forehead, one hand gripping the gurney's edge, the other shielding her swollen belly. Pregnant. Very pregnant. James's heart pounded like a jackhammer. He blinked as if he could erase the image, but she was there. Real, vulnerable, being wheeled toward a delivery room. Their eyes met for a fleeting moment, an eternity in a second. In Rachel's gaze, a storm raged, pain, anger, maybe even shame. But there was something else, something James couldn't decipher. She looked away, and the gurney vanished behind automatic doors. "James, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." Mia's voice snapped him back, but it felt distant, like it came from another world. "Nothing. I thought I saw someone I know," he muttered, his voice hoarse. Mia frowned, following his gaze to the now empty hallway. "Who? You're acting weird." James shook his head, trying to summon the confident mask he always wore. "Nobody important. Let's focus on your appointment, okay?" But his words rang hollow, and the weight in his chest grew heavier. Inside, James was a hurricane. Pregnant? How? How far along? And could the baby be his? The thought hit him like a punch. He did the math in his head, trying to recall the final weeks of their marriage. They'd barely been intimate then, but it was possible, more than possible. And if it was true, why hadn't she told him? Why hide something so monumental? Guilt slithered up his spine, cold as a Seattle winter. He'd left Rachel behind, convinced she was holding him back from happiness. But now, seeing her on that gurney, so fragile yet so strong. He wondered, what if he was the one holding himself back? Mia kept talking, oblivious to the storm inside him. "I think I'll ask the doctor to check my sleep too. I've been waking up so tired." But James wasn't listening. His mind was in the hallway, on the gurney, in Rachel's eyes. He needed to know. He needed to understand. But how? How do you approach an ex-wife you abandoned without a backward glance? How do you face the possibility that you're a father and didn't know? The receptionist called Mia's name, and she stood, adjusting her designer purse. "Come with me, James." He hesitated, his eyes still on the hallway. "I'll wait here. Text me if you need me." Mia rolled her eyes, but went alone. James stayed in the waiting room, the silence clashing with the chaos in his head. He grabbed his phone, not to check messages, but to scroll to Rachel's name on WhatsApp. Their last exchange months ago was a cold back and forth about splitting assets. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. What could he say? "Hey, saw you in the hospital. Is that baby mine?" It sounded absurd, even cruel. He closed the app and stood, walking to the window overlooking the parking lot. The Seattle sky was gray, heavy with clouds promising rain. James felt that weight inside him. Rachel was giving birth, maybe right now. And he was here, caught between the past he'd discarded and the present that suddenly felt so fragile. Mia would be back soon, with her easy smile and uncomplicated life. But James knew he couldn't pretend everything was fine anymore. Something had shifted, something he couldn't ignore. As he stared at his blurred reflection in the glass, James made a decision. He had to talk to Rachel. He had to know the truth. But before he could move, a nurse appeared in the hallway, her expression serious, a clipboard in hand. "Mr. Carter?" Her voice sliced through the air like a blade. James turned, his heart in his throat. How did she know his name? "The patient Rachel Carter asked to speak with you. It's about the baby." The floor seemed to vanish beneath him. Rachel wanted to talk. Now. But what would she say? That the baby was his, or that he had no claim to this child? What if something had gone wrong? Fear, a rare visitor for James, gripped his chest like a vice. He followed the nurse, each step echoing like a drumbeat toward an uncertain fate. The hallway felt endless, the beeping of medical monitors blending with the pounding of his blood in his ears. What would Rachel say? And more importantly, what was James ready to face? James trailed the nurse down the sterile corridor, the clack of his polished loafers on the linoleum mingling with the hum of monitors and faint voices. Each step pulled him deeper into a past he'd locked away, certain he'd never need to revisit. The air conditioning chilled his neck, but sweat beaded on his temples, betraying the turmoil he tried to suppress. Rachel wanted to talk about the baby. The nurse's words looped in his mind, heavy as lead, and he couldn't tell if what he felt was fear, guilt, or a hope he didn't dare name. The nurse stopped at a door marked Maternity Wing C. She turned to James, her eyes kind but firm. "She's inside. The delivery was tough, but she and the baby are stable. You can go in, but be gentle. She's been through a lot." James swallowed hard, the lump in his throat nearly choking him. He nodded, unable to speak, and pushed the door open with a trembling hand. The room was small, bathed in the soft glow of a window overlooking a hospital garden. The scent of antiseptic mixed with fresh-cut flowers, an oddly comforting blend. Rachel lay in bed, propped up on pillows, her face pale but calm, as if she'd weathered a storm and found peace in its wake. In her arms, wrapped in a blue blanket, was a tiny baby with wisps of dark hair and closed eyes, breathing softly. James froze in the doorway, his legs rooted, as if the floor might collapse if he moved. Rachel looked up and met his gaze. There was no warmth in her eyes, but no hatred either, just a chilling indifference. "You came," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. "I didn't think you would." James opened his mouth, but words failed him. He wanted to ask everything at once. "Is the baby mine? Why didn't you tell me? What happened?" All he managed was a weak, "Rachel, I saw you in the hall." "I didn't know." She gave a bitter smile, sharp enough to cut. "Didn't know a lot of things, did you, James?" Her tone was calm, but each word carried months of unspoken pain. She stroked the baby's head, a gesture so natural it made James's chest tighten. He was born 2 hours ago, 6 hours of labor, alone. That last word landed like a stone in the quiet room. James took a step forward, his eyes locked on the baby. Is he mine? The question slipped out, raw and clumsy. Rachel raised an eyebrow, as if the question insulted her. You think I'd hide something like this for fun? Yes, James, he's yours, but don't expect that to change anything. Her words stung like a slap. James felt the room sway, and he gripped the bed's edge for balance. Rachel, if I'd known, I swear I would have... She cut him off with a wave of her hand. Would have what, come back, skipped your fancy dinners? Dumped your new girlfriend? Her sarcasm was sharp, but beneath it lay a pain James knew he'd caused. I didn't know, he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. You should have told me. Rachel let out a short, humorless laugh. Told you what, James? That I was pregnant while you were signing divorce papers without a glance? That I was carrying your kid while you paraded her around like I never existed? She shook her head, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I wasn't going to beg for your love. I wasn't going to beg you to stay. James felt something break inside him. He wanted to argue, to say it wasn't like that he'd have done things differently. But the words felt false even in his head. He'd chosen to leave, chosen Mia, chosen a life that sparkled on the surface but now felt so empty. He looked at the baby again, and something new stirred in him, a mix of awe and dread. What's his name? He asked, almost afraid of the answer. Ethan, Rachel said, her tone softening for the first time. After my grandfather. She gazed at the baby, a genuine smile curving her lips, lighting up her tired face. He's perfect, James. He's perfect. James took another step, hesitant as if seeking permission. Can I hold him? Rachel paused, her eyes weighing him, deciding if he deserved the privilege. Finally she nodded. Be careful. He's fragile. She handed Ethan to him, and James felt the baby's light weight, the warmth of his tiny body against his chest. It was real. This was his son. His hands shook as he held Ethan with a reverence he'd never known. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about contracts, profits, or status. Just this moment, this small miracle in his arms. Rachel, I want to be part of this, he said, his voice thick. I want to be a father to him. Rachel's eyes hardened again. Being a father isn't just showing up when you feel like it, James. It's being there. It's sacrifice. Do you even know what that means? The question pierced him, because he knew he didn't have an answer. Not yet. Before he could say more, the door swung open, and Mia burst in, already talking. James, the doctor said you'd be here, but I... She stopped, her eyes widening as she saw James holding a baby, Rachel in the bed. The silence in the room turned heavy, like glass about to shatter. What's going on here? Mia asked, her voice trembling with confusion and anger. James opened his mouth, but no words came. Rachel, unfazed, spoke up. Mia, this is Ethan, my son, and James's. Her bluntness was a blade, cutting through any chance of softening the blow. Mia's eyes darted from Rachel to James, flashing with betrayal. Your son? You have a kid with her? She laughed, a high, incredulous sound. And when were you going to tell me, James? Or were you just going to let me find out like this? Mia, I swear I didn't know until today, James said, gently handing Ethan back to Rachel. I saw her in the hall, and this is all new to me. Mia crossed her arms, her face hardening. New to you? And what am I, James, a placeholder while you figure out your life with your ex-wife? She turned to Rachel. And you? Why didn't you say anything sooner? What are you trying to do? Ruin his life? Rachel raised an eyebrow, unruffled. I don't ruin lives, Mia. I take care of my own, and now my son's. Her calm only seemed to fuel Mia's anger. She spun back to James, pointing a finger. You choose, James, right now, me or this. She gestured at Rachel and Ethan, as if they were a problem he could erase. James felt the ultimatum like a chain around his neck. He looked at Rachel, cradling Ethan with a serenity he envied, then at Mia, her eyes demanding an answer he didn't have. Mia, I need time to process this, he said, his voice faltering. I just found out I'm a father. Time? Mia laughed again, tears in her eyes. You think I'm going to wait while you play happy family with her? No, James. I deserve better than that. She grabbed her purse and stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle a picture frame on the wall. The silence that followed was deafening. Rachel said nothing, just kept rocking Ethan, as if Mia's dramatic exit didn't faze her, but James knew she was watching, assessing. You didn't have to be so harsh with her, he said finally, his voice low. And you didn't have to stay silent, Rachel shot back, not looking up. But here we are. She sighed, adjusting Ethan's blanket. Go after her, James, if that's what you want. Her words hit like a final blow. He wanted to stay, to hold Ethan again, to fix what he'd broken. But Mia's tears, her ultimatum, tugged him toward the door. He looked at Rachel one last time, searching for something. Forgiveness, maybe, or a chance, but she gave him nothing but a look that said, "Prove you've changed." He left the room, the hallway feeling longer than before. His phone buzzed, a text from Mia. "I'm in the car, last chance." James stopped, his heart torn between the past he'd shattered and the present he thought he wanted. But there was something bigger, Ethan, his son, and the possibility of being the man he'd never been. In the days that followed, James barely slept. He returned to the hospital, but Rachel had been discharged. He tried calling, but she didn't pick up. Mutual friends said she was staying with her mother, Margaret, in a quiet Tacoma neighborhood. James drove there one evening, his heart in his hands, but stopped at the corner, unable to knock on the door. What would he say? How could he fix years of mistakes in one conversation? Meanwhile, Mia grew distant. Her texts were cold, demanding he pick a side. But James couldn't choose. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Ethan's face, felt the weight of his tiny body in his arms. He started reading about fatherhood, baby care, how to be present. It was as if a dormant part of him was waking up. A week later, he gathered the courage to visit Margaret's house. The street was peaceful, with trees swaying in the breeze and kids playing on the sidewalk. He parked, the engine still humming, and saw Rachel on the porch, rocking Ethan in a swing. She looked tired, but there was a strength in her he didn't remember seeing before. He stepped out, his heart pounding, and called, "Rachel." She looked up, surprised but not smiling. "What do you want, James?" Her voice was flat, but there was a challenge in it. He opened the gate, taking a step forward. "I want to know my son. I want to do this right." Rachel studied him for a long moment, as if she could see through him. Finally, she gestured to a chair beside her. "Sit. Let's talk." James sat, his heart racing, but before he could speak, his phone rang. Mia's name flashed on the screen. Rachel noticed and raised an eyebrow. "You going to answer?" she asked, her voice calm but loaded. James hesitated, his finger hovering over the screen. Answering meant holding on to Mia, the life he knew. Ignoring it meant choosing Ethan, Rachel, and a path he couldn't predict. The phone kept ringing, each tone like an ultimatum. Then, in a surge he couldn't explain, James silenced the call and slipped the phone into his pocket. Rachel said nothing, but a faint glint appeared in her eyes. She handed Ethan to him, and James felt the baby's weight again, different this time. It was a weight he wanted to carry. That night, James drove home with a lighter heart, but a mind full of questions. He knew the road ahead was long, that Rachel didn't trust him, that Mia wouldn't accept his choice. But for the first time, he felt he was choosing something bigger than himself. Days later, as James tried to balance visits to Ethan with the chaos of his work, he got an unexpected call. It was Margaret, Rachel's mother, a woman with a warm voice and a big heart. "James, we need to talk. It's about Rachel, and something she hasn't told you." Her voice quavered, as if she held a secret bigger than any of them could grasp. James felt the air leave his lungs. What hadn't Rachel told him? Was there something beyond Ethan, something that could change everything? He gripped the phone, his heart racing as Margaret continued, "Come over, now, and come prepared." The twilight painted the sky a deep indigo as James parked in front of Margaret's house in Tacoma. The engine ticked, mirroring the uncertainty in his chest. The street, with its swaying trees and distant laughter of kids, felt too calm for the weight of Margaret's call. "Come over, now, and come prepared." Her words looped in his mind, urgent and cryptic. What hadn't Rachel told him? Something beyond Ethan, something that could upend everything. He cut the engine, the silence settling like a curtain, and took a deep breath, trying to tame the anxiety clawing up his spine. James opened the gate carefully, its creak sounding like a warning. Margaret's house was modest, with faded blue siding and flower pots lining the porch, their sweet jasmine scent clashing with the tension he carried. Rachel sat in the same rocking chair he'd seen her in before, cradling Ethan. Her eyes met his, but she didn't smile. A shadow of worry crossed her face, something he hadn't noticed before. Margaret stood beside her, grey hair pulled into a tight bun, arms crossed, her gaze piercing. "You got here fast," Margaret said, her voice steady but with an emotional tremor. "Come inside, we need to talk." James followed them into the house, the wooden floor creaking under his feet. The smell of fresh coffee blended with homemade bread, and the small living room with its worn furniture and framed photos felt like a shrine to memories. He sat on the couch, the rough fabric scratching his hands, while Rachel settled Ethan in a crib nearby. The baby slept peacefully, unaware of the heavy conversation ahead. Margaret took a seat in an armchair, hands clasped, her eyes locking onto James with an intensity that made him want to look away. "Rachel didn't want me to tell you this," she began, her voice low but firm. "But you need to know. Not for you, but for her. And for Ethan." James felt a chill run through him, as if the room had turned to ice. "Know what?" he asked, his voice hoarse. He glanced at Rachel, who stared at the floor, her lips pressed tight. "Rachel, what's going on?" She didn't answer, her shoulders stiffening as if bracing for a blow. Margaret took a deep breath, as if summoning courage. When Rachel found out she was pregnant, it wasn't just the shock of being alone. She was sick, James, really sick. The words hit like stones, each heavier than the last. James blinked, trying to process. "Sick? What do you mean, sick?" His voice shook and he leaned forward, hands gripping his knees. "She had a heart condition," Margaret continued, her eyes glistening with held-back tears. "A serious arrhythmia. The doctors said pregnancy was risky, that it might not end well, for her or the baby." James felt the floor drop away, the same emptiness he'd felt seeing Rachel on the gurney. She spent months in and out of tests, treatments, fighting to keep Ethan safe, knowing every day could be a risk to her life. And she did it alone, James, because you weren't there. The silence was suffocating. James looked at Rachel, desperate for a sign this was a mistake, an exaggeration. But her face, now raised, confirmed it all. There was exhaustion in her eyes, but also a strength he'd never fully seen. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Rachel, I could have helped." Rachel finally spoke, her voice steady but thick with emotion. "Helped how, James? You were so caught up in your new life, your deals, your girlfriend. I didn't want to be a burden. I didn't want you staying out of pity." She paused, breathing deeply. "I chose Ethan. I chose to fight for him, and thank God we're both here." James felt tears burn his eyes, a rarity for him. The image of Rachel facing a high-risk pregnancy alone, while he dined at upscale restaurants with Mia, twisted like a knife in his chest. "Rachel. I didn't know," he said, his voice breaking. "If I'd known, I swear I would have—" "Don't swear, James," Rachel cut in, her eyes flashing. "Your promises don't mean anything until you prove them." She gestured to Ethan, stirring in his crib as if sensing the tension. "He's what matters now. Not me, not you, not what could have been. Him." Margaret stepped in, her voice softer now. "Rachel still needs care, James. Her heart's better but not healed. She'll need a risky surgery soon. And Ethan needs a father. Not someone who shows up when it's convenient, but someone who's here for real, because we don't know what could happen." She leaned forward, her eyes piercing his. "The question is, are you up for it? Or are you going to run again?" Her words were both a challenge and a plea. James looked at Ethan, his tiny, perfect face, and felt a resolve he didn't know he had. "I want to be here," he said, his voice steady for the first time. "I want to do this right, for him, and for you, Rachel. I'll be by your side through this." Rachel didn't respond, but her eyes softened for a moment. Margaret, unconvinced, said, "Words are easy, James. Show it with actions." She stood, signaling the conversation was over. Rachel needs rest. She's got a doctor's appointment tomorrow to schedule the surgery. James left the house with a heavy heart, but a newfound clarity. He drove through Tacoma's dark streets, the radio off, the only sound the low hum of the engine, and Margaret's words echoing in his mind. Rachel was sick. She'd nearly lost her life to bring Ethan into the world, and he hadn't been there. The guilt was a weight like a backpack full of stones, but for the first time, he didn't want to run from it. In the following days, James began to change. He cancelled non-essential meetings, ignored client emails, and spent hours researching arrhythmias, newborn care, and fatherhood. He showed up at Margaret's house daily, bringing groceries, diapers, or just his presence. Rachel greeted him cautiously but didn't push him away. He held Ethan, learning to change diapers with a clumsiness that made Rachel laugh, despite herself. Each laugh was a small victory, a brick in the bridge he was trying to rebuild. Mia, meanwhile, wouldn't accept his choice. Her texts grew angrier, colder, until one night she showed up at his downtown Seattle apartment, her eyes red with hurt and fury. "You're throwing everything away for her, James, for an ex-wife who doesn't even want you," she demanded, her voice shaking. James tried to explain, but words felt inadequate. "It's not about her, Mia. It's about Ethan. And me. I have to do this." Mia shook her head, tears streaming. "You'll regret this. When she hurts you again, don't come crawling back." She left, leaving behind the echo of her words and the void of a life James no longer wanted. But his journey was just beginning. One morning, as he helped Rachel organize Ethan's nursery, Margaret arrived with news that stopped the air. "Rachel, the doctor called," she said, her voice tight. "They want you in tomorrow. They found something in the latest tests." Rachel went pale, her hands trembling as she held a stack of baby clothes. James's heart clenched, fear surging back. "What did they find?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Margaret hesitated, her eyes full of worry. "They didn't say much, just that it's urgent, and they need to repeat the tests and you'll be admitted." Rachel let the clothes slip, the soft thud against the floor loud in the silence. She looked at Ethan, sleeping in his crib, then at James, her eyes shining with something he couldn't read, fear maybe, or a silent plea. That night, James couldn't sleep. He sat on Margaret's porch, staring at the stars, the weight of losing Rachel pressing down on him. He'd spent months without her, convinced it was for the best. But now, seeing her fight, seeing her be the mother Ethan needed, he realized how much he'd underestimated her, how much he'd lost her, and how much he still wanted to love her. The next day, he went with Rachel to the hospital, holding her hand as she walked into the exam room. The doctor, a middle-aged man with thin-rimmed glasses, reviewed the tests with a grave expression. "Rachel, we need to repeat the test today and you'll be admitted." Rachel nodded, her face stoic, but James felt her hand tighten around his. Rachel moved slowly down the hospital corridor, each step heavy on the polished floor, as if matching the uneven rhythm of her heart. James stayed beside her, gripping her hand with a steadiness that hid his trembling fear. The antiseptic smell mixed with the faint scent of flowers from a vase in the waiting area. Rachel's bag, packed with essentials, hung from James's shoulder. He'd insisted on carrying it. "I'm staying with you, Rachel." "I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice rough but resolute. Rachel nodded, her eyes fixed ahead, as if anchoring herself against the unknown. At the admissions desk, a nurse with a warm smile handed Rachel a form to fill out. "We'll get your room ready, Miss Carter. Don't worry, everything's under control." But control felt like an empty word to James. How could there be control when the doctor had mentioned discrepancies in the tests, a vague phrase that loomed like a storm cloud? He watched Rachel fill out the form with shaky hands, and his chest tightened. The thought of losing her, now that he was beginning to see her worth, was a burden he didn't know how to bear. As Rachel was taken to her room, James stayed in the waiting area, his heart racing unevenly. He pulled out his phone, fingers hesitating before opening WhatsApp. Margaret's message still lingered, a stark reminder. They need to repeat the tests and she'll be admitted. He closed his eyes, pushing away images of Rachel on the gurney, Ethan in his crib, all he'd ignored for so long. Then, like a spark in his mind, he decided to do something he'd never done, ask for help. not from his business contacts or high society friends, but from those who mattered. He opened a group chat with his closest friends, people who knew Rachel, who'd shared moments with them during their marriage. With trembling fingers, he typed, "Guys, I need a favor. Rachel's in the hospital. It's her heart, and they're running tests. Please, pray for her and Ethan. They're everything to me now." He paused, his pride warring with the vulnerability of the act. But for Rachel, for Ethan, he hit send. Within minutes, replies flooded in. "Stay strong, James, we're praying. Rachel's tough, she'll pull through. We've got your back, man." Each message was a thread of hope, stitching up the hole in his chest. Margaret, who'd arrived at the hospital soon after, was rallying her own support. In a corner of the waiting room, she spoke on the phone with her church friends, her voice steady but emotional. "My daughter needs prayers. She's a fighter, but now's the time to come together for her." James watched, awed by the strength of this woman who, despite fear, stood unshaken. He approached, hesitant. "Margaret, I started a prayer chain too. I hope it helps." She looked at him, her eyes flashing with surprise and approval. "You're starting to get it, James. Faith can move mountains, and Rachel needs all the mountains moved now." James's phone buzzed again, and he sighed, glancing at the screen. It was Mia. Her message was short but sharp. "So you chose, huh? Good luck with your family, don't call me." He read it, his heart heavy with guilt for hurting her, but he didn't reply. Before he could pocket the phone, it rang, Mia's name flashing. He hesitated but answered, knowing he needed to close this chapter. "Mia, I'm at the hospital with Rachel. She's admitted." "This isn't the time," he said, his voice firm but weary. Mia's voice trembled with anger and desperation. "At the hospital? With her? James, you're throwing everything away. I gave you everything and you picked the woman you left. You'll regret this." James closed his eyes, her words trying to find a foothold but failing. "Mia, I'm not choosing against you. I'm choosing Ethan and Rachel. They need me. I'm sorry." He hung up before she could respond, the silence both freeing and terrifying. Mia was right about one thing. He'd made a choice. Now he had to live with it. That night, James stayed at the hospital, perched on an uncomfortable chair beside Rachel's bed. She slept, her face peaceful but pale, a monitor beeping steadily beside her, marking time he feared was running out. He held her hand, her skin's warmth a reminder she was still fighting. "You're stronger than I'll ever be, Rachel," he whispered, the words nearly lost in the quiet room. "I won't leave you alone again." Morning brought a palpable tension. Margaret arrived early, clutching a Bible, her fingers tracing the pages as she murmured prayers. Rachel, awake now, looked frailer in the hospital's harsh light, but her eyes still held that quiet strength James was beginning to admire. "You didn't have to stay all night, James," she said, her voice weak but laced with irony. "I'm not made of glass." He smiled despite the ache in his chest. "I know, but I needed to be here." The doctor entered soon after, the same man with thin-rimmed glasses carrying a thick file. His face, usually stern, held a hint of wonder today. Rachel sat up, her heart pounding, while Margaret gripped her rosary tighter. James stood, his body tense, bracing for impact. "Rachel, we have the results from the repeat tests," the doctor began, flipping through the pages. "And it's something I can't explain." The silence was deafening, broken only by the monitor's beeps. Rachel gripped James's hand, her nails digging into his skin. "What is it?" she asked, her voice trembling. The doctor took a deep breath, as if still processing. "The issue with your artery. It's gone. Completely. The tests show your heart is functioning normally, as if the arrhythmia never existed. We ran them twice to be sure. It's like a miracle." The words hung in the air, heavy, yet light. Rachel blinked, eyes wide, while Margaret let out a sob, covering her face. "A miracle?" Rachel whispered. The doctor nodded, a small smile breaking through. "We don't have a medical explanation. After Ethan's birth, something shifted. Your heart stabilized. We're just asking you to come back in a month for follow-ups, to be safe. But for now, Rachel, you're healed." James felt the room tilt, not from fear, but relief. He looked at Rachel, who covered her face, tears slipping through her fingers. Margaret stood hugging her daughter with a strength that could hold up the world. "I knew it, my girl. I knew God was watching over you," she murmured, her voice choked. James, without thinking, pulled Rachel into a hug, ignoring her surprise. "You're okay, Rachel, you're okay," he repeated, as if convincing himself. She didn't pull away, but didn't fully return the embrace either. Her eyes met his, revealing a vulnerability she rarely showed. "I thought I might not see Ethan grow up," she said, her voice breaking. James's heart shattered at her words. "You will, Rachel. You'll be here for him, for us." The days that followed were a mix of celebration and caution. Margaret's house buzzed with life, its faded blue walls soaking up the joy spilling from every corner. The scent of fresh coffee mingled with homemade pies brought by neighbors, and laughter filled the living room, where friends gathered to celebrate Rachel's discharge. At the center, Rachel held Ethan, his serene face oblivious to the upheaval he'd caused. James stayed close, folding blankets with care, his movements still clumsy but earnest. He watched Rachel constantly, as if she might vanish if he looked away. The miracle, her inexplicable recovery, hung in the air, a gift no one dared question but all embraced with gratitude. Margaret, her bun tight and her smile lighting the room, poured tea for guests, her hands steady from a lifetime of caregiving. "It's God, folks," she said, eyes shining. "He heard our prayers." Friends nodded, some teary, others sharing stories of faith that amplified the room's hope. James, never one for church or talk of spirituality, felt moved by this community's strength. He thought of the prayer chain he'd started, the flood of supportive texts, and realized something bigger was guiding him. It wasn't just about him, his deals, or his mistakes anymore. It was about Rachel, Ethan, and a chance to build something real. Rachel seemed lighter, as if months of weight had lifted from her shoulders. She still carried caution in her eyes when she looked at James, a reminder that trust had to be earned. But there were moments, small fleeting, when her guard dropped, like when James calmed Ethan's cries with an off-key lullaby, and Rachel let slip a smile. Or when he brought diapers and insisted on assembling Ethan's crib, cursing the confusing instructions, making her laugh despite herself. "You're stubborn, aren't you?" she said, chuckling, and that sound was music to James, a sign of hope. But not everything was calm. James's phone buzzed occasionally, and he knew without looking it was Mia. Her messages swung between anger and pleading, as if she thought she could sway him. "You really think she loves you, James? She's just using you for the baby." Or softer, "I miss you, James. Call me. Let's talk." He read them, guilt gnawing at him for hurting her, but didn't reply. His choice was made. Every time he held Ethan, saw Rachel fighting to be the mother Ethan needed, he felt a certainty he'd never had before. Mia was part of a past he no longer wanted. One night, as James helped Rachel wash dishes in Margaret's kitchen, his phone rang. Mia again. Rachel, drying a plate, raised an eyebrow but stayed silent. James sighed, grabbing the phone. "I need to end this for good," he muttered, more to himself than her. He stepped onto the porch, the cool night air soothing the heat on his neck. "Mia, please stop," he said when he answered. "I've told you, my life is with Ethan and Rachel now." Mia's voice shook with rage and despair. "You're blind, James. You think she loves you? She's just keeping you around for convenience." James closed his eyes, her words trying to take root but failing. "Mia, I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want to be a father to Ethan, and I want to be there for Rachel if she'll let me. I'm sorry, but you need to move on." He hung up before she could reply, the night silence wrapping around him like a hug. Back in the kitchen, Rachel was still drying the same plate, her eyes studying him with quiet curiosity. "Sorted?" she asked, her tone neutral but tinged with interest. James nodded, his heart pounding. Sorted. Weeks turned into months, and James became a fixture in Rachel and Ethan's lives. He learned Ethan's schedule, the songs that lulled him to sleep, the right way to hold him to ease colic. Rachel softened around him, bit by bit. They talked about simple things, Seattle's weather, Ethan's antics, Margaret's recipes, but sometimes the past crept in, unavoidable. "Ever wonder what it'd be like if we hadn't split?" Rachel asked one night, sitting on the porch with Ethan asleep in his stroller. James paused, caught off guard. "Every day," he admitted softly, "and I regret not fighting for you. For us." Rachel didn't reply, but her eyes gleamed under the moonlight, and James sensed she might be starting to believe him. A month later, Rachel returned to the hospital for follow-up tests as the doctor had advised. James insisted on going, despite her protests. "You've got work, James. You don't need to put your life on hold for me," she said, but he shook his head. "My life is you too now." In the exam room, the doctor with thin-rimmed glasses reviewed the results with a smile that lit up the space. "Rachel, the tests confirm what we saw. Your heart is perfect. No trace of arrhythmia. You're officially healed." Rachel covered her mouth, tears streaming, while James, without thinking, pulled her into a hug. "I knew it, Rachel. I knew you'd be okay," he murmured, his voice thick. Margaret, there with them, raised her hands to the sky, thanking God aloud, while the doctor chuckled, visibly moved. Rachel's recovery brought new energy to everyone. Margaret's house hummed with joy, its blue walls absorbing the happiness. Coffee and pies filled the air, and laughter rang out as friends celebrated Rachel's return. Rachel held Ethan, his calm face unaware of the storm he'd sparked. James stayed near, folding blankets with care, watching her constantly. The miracle of her recovery was a gift they all cherished. Margaret, her smile radiant, served tea, her hands steady from years of nurturing. "It's God's work," she said, eyes shining. "He heard us." Friends agreed, sharing stories of faith that amplified the hope. James, never religious, felt the community's strength. His prayer chain's responses a reminder of something bigger. It was about Rachel, Ethan, and a real future. Rachel seemed unburdened, her caution toward James easing. She smiled when he soothed Ethan, or struggled with crib assembly, her laughter a sign of trust slowly rebuilding. "Stubborn as ever," she teased, and James clung to those moments. But Mia lingered. Her texts, angry then pleading, went unanswered. "She's using you," she wrote, or "I miss you, James." He felt guilt but stayed silent. His choice was clear. Ethan and Rachel were his future. One night as they washed dishes, Mia called again. Rachel, drying a plate, glanced at him. James stepped outside, answering firmly, "Mia, my life is with Ethan and Rachel. Please move on." He hung up, returning to find Rachel watching him. "Done?" she asked. "Done," he said. Months passed, and James was a constant presence, learning Ethan's needs and earning Rachel's trust. They talked of the past sometimes, like when Rachel asked, "What if we hadn't split?" on the porch. "I regret not fighting for us," James said, and her silence held a flicker of belief. A year after Ethan's birth, James planned a surprise. He took Rachel to a cozy Seattle diner, soft lights and acoustic guitar setting the mood. Ethan stayed with Margaret, and it was their first time alone in years. They laughed, reminisced, and spoke of the future. Over dessert, James took her hand. "Rachel, I know I hurt you. I don't deserve you. But you and Ethan are my family. I want to prove it forever." He pulled out a simple, elegant ring. "Will you marry me?" Again. Rachel's eyes welled up, and for a moment, James feared rejection. Then she smiled, lighting up the room. "Yes, James. For Ethan. For us." They embraced, tears mixing as diners clapped, moved by the scene. The wedding was at Margaret's church, a small ceremony filled with love. Rachel walked down the aisle in a simple white dress, holding jasmine, the scent of her mother's porch. Ethan, 1 year old, wore a tiny suit, looking angelic in Margaret's arms. James at the altar felt his heart swell. They renewed their vows, promising love, respect, and loyalty to each other and Ethan. "I'll always be here, Rachel," James said, voice thick. "And I'll trust you, James," she replied, eyes shining. Ethan clapped, and the church erupted in cheers. Years later, Ethan grew in a home full of love, racing through the house, learning to bike with James and listening to Rachel's stories of resilience. He was a bright-eyed boy, his smile like his mother's, always ready for hugs. Rachel's Moms of Heart group, born from her online posts about her journey, became a lifeline for women facing tough pregnancies. She traveled for events, James and Ethan by her side, proud of her mission. James scaled back his business, focusing on family, finding purpose in supporting Rachel and raising Ethan. Mia moved on, starting anew in Portland with a new career and partner. James wished her well, relieved everyone had found peace. One summer night when Ethan was 5, James and Rachel sat in their new backyard, Ethan chasing their adopted dog, laughing wildly. Rachel leaned on James's shoulder, smiling. "Ever think about how everything changed?" she asked softly. James kissed her forehead. "Every day, and I'm grateful for every moment. For you, for him, for us." They sat under the stars, knowing that, despite past storms, they'd built something unbreakable. Their story inspired many, proof that love nurtured with patience could conquer anything. Ethan, with his radiant smile, was a testament that the greatest miracles come from the hardest choices. What did you think of the story? Did you know it was inspired by a true story? Now tell me, do you like stories about miracles? Now I'd like to ask you to subscribe to the channel and like the video. That way you'll help me, and I'll be able to bring you more exciting stories like this one. Thank you.